So we are going to discuss my journey, so to speak, that is still ongoing in thinking of our relationship today to tradition and how it could be our gateway to future, and particularly we're talking about architecture. So I'm going to bore you with this one first, but it's important. But the lecture is based on my research and practice, primarily dedicated to exploring an alternative interpretation of tradition to inform new possibilities for expanding architectural theory and practice, especially with regards to the much debated term Islamic architecture. But this also applies to all ancient traditions and architecture rooted in spirituality. My premise stems from a hypothesis that the current dominant interpretations fall into one of three main classifications: Belle Epoque historicism, where it's blind imitation, or Islamizing the isms, as in bringing an idea that is not of Islam or Christianity or any spiritual order in order to appease to other ideas that might be actually in complete opposition. And I'm talking about that in architecture. And then embracing the isms, saying that your given tradition, whatever it is, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, does not have answers to today's questions. So I'm challenging these three stances. And that takes us to a question which is, what is tradition? And what is Islamic architecture, and is tradition relevant at all when we think of any possible future of architecture? And what are the intellectual sources for the creative processes accepted as Islamic? And I believe that finding answers to such questions is an ongoing process. I will share my own attempts. Needless to say that there are no absolute answers, rather my own interpretation through my own practical attempt to implement my hypothesis. So architectural theory today is basically rooted in this moment. We're not going to discuss Nietzsche, but we can, I think not many people will disagree that we live in a godless world today. And then the reduction of human existence and experience to only the physical and the psychological, and a complete denial of the spiritual dimension. And then you start getting dichotomies, whether less is more, less is a bore, because when you don't have a reference, at least one absolute, everything is possible. So the inevitability of dichotomy and constant clash, function follows form, form follows function, is less is more, less is bore, absolute universalism versus absolute relativism, prescriptive versus descriptive, absolute reason versus absolute myth, and so on. The myth of linear progress as well. Any chronically advanced point on the timeline must be better than what was before. Is that really true? So why do we need alternatives? Here I'm defending the idea of context, and by context I mean context in time and place, and as pertaining to people and as pertaining to conditions. No one universal approach can contain the diversity that God created this universe with. There's a fish, there's a bird, there's people that live on the top of the mountains, and there are people that live by the sea. And each one of these different conditions and these different peoples and different environments and different historical accumulation is supposed to produce to us a very intense answer to many challenges that we face as human beings, especially in a world where the distances are shrinking, but our problems are actually becoming bigger. But then the reason I have this slide ahead of you is that usually in the global south, and Egypt is one of these countries, when you talk about identity or context, you are challenged, and it is said to you that you're pursuing this just because you couldn't catch the train of modernity, and you are running away from facing the contemporary challenges. You're backwards, and you're taking us to irrelevant questions, And my answer to that are two examples from two countries that champion modernity, not just caught up with the train, they are the train, Japan and America. And so Junichiro Tanizaki, a literary figure from Japan, is discussing this, is saying that all things that they invented as Japanese people, but from within a Western world view, does not really respond to the historical accumulation and hence the potential for the future of Japan. And that they've become great in imitating something that didn't really come from their soil, so to speak. So that's definitely not a person escaping the questions of his time, because he comes from a country that has really led the way in modernity. And the other one, America, you can say it's the first country that was born to the idea of modernity. And here I'm using the example from music. So we have Aaron Copland, who is credited with creating the sound of America. So he was studying in Paris with his colleagues, and they were unknowingly learning to become an extension of European composers. And of course, ethnically they may be European, but they've already been on a new land for 200 years with a completely different condition and situation than Europe. And so their teacher, a French teacher, Nadine Boulanger, told them there's no use in you being an echo of the European tradition. You have to find your voice. So these are my answers to those who say that the question of identity or context is irrelevant and it's a form of escapism. Here I'm also using the words of the French philosopher René Guénon, who is talking about dogmatism, and he says, what is dogmatism if not the purely sentimental and very human tendency to present one's own individual ideas with all the relative and uncertain elements they inevitably entail, as if they were incontestable truths. And this is, I say, it's a slap on the face of modernity, which considers only white male figure as the only worthy representative of humanity, which is not. It's just one of God's many creatures. So he's saying it is but a short step from this to the desire to impose these so-called truths on others, and history shows well enough how many times this step has been taken. And we know the results of that, and we're still seeing it, regretfully. So tradition, as I understand it, the definition, the sources and main principles, is informed by religion, philosophy, science, visual arts, oral arts, verbal arts are then the expressive vessels for these three realms from which knowledge or human knowledge comes from. Because we have revelation, it's the metaphysical source, we have the rational, and then we have the sensorial. There are three different ways to know knowledge, and if each one of them comes from a secure source, then they will never contradict. So what do we mean by tradition, and what are the sources for tradition, and what do we hope to achieve from engaging tradition? So number one, for instance, this word istikhlaf or stewardship. We see here two architectural applications dealing with a particular problem, which is birds and how birds can affect architecture. And these bird palaces that we see all around the walls of Istanbul, for instance, in many Muslim countries, is an effort to accommodate and solve a problem, but without excluding that creature of God, which is the pigeon. Whereas our modern solutions, look at the spikes below, and the same thing then extends to human beings. You have this homeless man. Oops, sorry, what did I, yeah. You have this homeless man here. You see these spikes, and this is a picture in England, and when it's raining, they don't want him to sit here, basically. So we can see the effect of our solutions. And we all know this story from the fables of Aesop, where you're trying to, the fox, invites the stork and offers a plate by which the store cannot eat, and so it's returned. We need to accommodate one another, that's the thing. So an alternative approach, tradition as a gateway to the future of architecture, and I'm speaking about the theory, the ideas that are happening in my head in order to, that has begotten what we will see. I don't know how successful I am, but this is my attempt. So this is a project in Basuna, a small village. The population is about 25,000 people, 500 kilometers south of Cairo. So, sorry, this is Cairo, and this is Basuna. Of course, Egypt is the river Nile, one of the longest river with its tributaries in the world, meeting the biggest Sahara, the biggest desert in the world, making the country into an east bank, a west bank, and of course we have the delta. Turkey's up here. Okay, and this is the village, and there was that land had a mosque, two versions of a mosque before. I came when the second version was in disrepair, and I was asked to see whether I should raise it completely and design it from the beginning, or to restore it. So on my way, I was living in London at the time, and I flew in, and on the road I was looking at the different types of modern mosques or contemporary mosques that were being built. This one is slightly older. This was the only one that I liked, actually. And I found that the problem of these buildings are not a lack in budget. It was a lack in understanding the history of Egyptian architecture, the history of Islamic architecture. There's a lot of money, but there's no understanding of what architecture is. So it's not about poverty. It's about intellectual poverty, perhaps. This one also I liked very much. The only one probably I like, because it does work as a little mosque for the farmers on this land. But then look at these are all. It's just uncalculated grandeur or superlative architecture, big and tall. Tallest, biggest, and so on. Anyhow, so I went to evaluate whether this mosque should be raised or should be conserved, and my conclusion was based on two things: the state of the building itself, and also my evaluation of the architecture of the village. So with regards to the building first, I saw that there's a problem in the building. There's a lack of a clear master plan. So this red boundary is the whole land, but the building is this one here, and then there are toilets down here, and there's an extension of the prayer hall that even lacks orientation, because I'm sure many of you understand that a mosque needs to be orientated towards Mecca. This is a small road, 8 meters to 10 meters in width, so it's a very narrow road. The traffic here is pedestrian, some little vehicles, and then cattle and donkeys and so on. You have an even narrower road that takes you to a semi-private space, a cul-de-sac, called in the Upper Egyptian lingo, Rahaba. And then you have the cemetery here of the whole village, and then here you have residentials that belong to one family. That's why this space here is semi-private. And then they were using the rest of the land for a random parking area. You're going to see in the photos. So the green wall is the wall of the cemetery. This is the 8-meter wide road. You can see how people are moving. There are modern cars, but there's also donkeys. It's not a paved road. Here you can start seeing the bathrooms, and it's so funny to enter a mosque through its bathrooms, and to have the bathrooms in the direction of the Qibla, like people who are standing. Imagine the bathrooms behind the altar here. How inappropriate is that? And that's the building of the mosque. So these windows have the toilets underneath, and you can imagine all sorts of problems, and whether in terms of meaning, semiotics, or function. And then you have this lovely old tree, which in its shade you have every day a different vendor selling different things. So this for me was a very important focal point. But you can see also here remnants of the old architecture of the village, which is very simple. It's mud brick, but there's a lot of attention to detail. There's an intention for beauty and aesthetics, which we will see in more examples. You can see these are the toilets in terrible shape. And then you wind it, this is the extension, and it's not very well built, and it's also not oriented properly. And there was the structural condition was not also in its best because of the building of this new building here, which caused this structural crack, and we can see it also again on the inside. And then the roof, which is made of mud. Sohag is a very dry place. It rains every 10 years, but when it rains, it's a flash flood. So that broke the roof, and the people were so scared. You can see it all on the ground. So this was the state of the place, and then also the architectural disrepair. And then the second point is the actual, where does this building stand within the general fabric of the village? Was it an addition? It was 80 years old when I visited it. And is it an addition? Does it have any tangible or intangible significance that adds to the village by which we then need to conserve it and restore it? Or is it something else? In my opinion, when I visited the village and I looked at its architecture, I classified it into two main categories. So buildings that were 80 years old and younger, and buildings that were older than 80 years. So it's the same time that the mosque was built. And the buildings before the mosque all had, and we'll see examples, had sensible understanding of materiality, of construction, of how the people live, and it's exactly the opposite after. So my analysis was, since the mosque is the only public building in the village which everybody uses, the way it was built with very little consideration in all of the aspects of architecture influenced the people, and they imitated it when they were doing their own buildings. So actually I consider it a point of downfall in the history of the architecture of the village, and based on that I said we should not, in addition to the points that I mentioned about the architecture of the mosque itself, it should not be conserved. Actually, this is a very good point by which we can revise the decision for the most influential building in the village to continue the discontinued history of architecture of Basuna. For instance, here, this is one of the things that, one of the old buildings, so again mud brick but meticulously put together. There's this corner turning detail shows an awareness of how a building affects the right of the road. So there's an awareness, but this frieze as well. It's not an expensive building. It's not as expensive as the building behind it, which has concrete, but which has no consideration, whether for thermal gain or for economy or anything. So these are old examples. Again, we can see this here. This regretfully no longer exists, but we can see an intent for beauty, an understanding for how people live. You have these big windows, but people are very private, and the segregation between men and women is very strong. And so, for instance, you want to ventilate, but you don't want to be exposed, so you have this opening, and this is closed all the time. All of this disappears with the contemporary architecture of the village that has one place as its source, blind imitation of whatever architecture they see in big cities, but not even quality imitations. Again, you can see that in the old buildings, different, but the intent for beauty and so on, and intentional design. Here again, in this entrance, balcony, and then comes this detail that is 150 meters away from the mosque, which is my savior in this case, because I was so worried that I'm going to project my own ideas, my personal expertise onto a village in a non-relevant manner. But then when I find this, I see that we're on the same page, and I thank God for that, because it becomes my design anchor, that I'm going to produce something that may look new, but in reality, it is very rooted in the building tradition of the village. It is a turning corner detail as well. So this is the village. At the same time, we have to understand that architecture is different than construction and building. Architecture is thought materialized in terms of space. So whatever I'm thinking of, whatever is occupying me or my society or the society that is of the users, should and must appear into the architecture that they produce. At the time, I was finishing my thesis at the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London, and I was actually writing this thesis about the mosque in Britain, and I carefully did not call it British mosque, because I don't think the mosque as a typology still does not sit comfortably in the British context, because it should give its society not just the small group of worshippers that worship in it. So for instance, in my country, we have Muslims, we have Christians, but the Christians who do not worship in the mosque, they still feel that these mosques as architecture, not as theology, but as architecture, speaks to them and speaks their language and speaks the language of their environment. And we can see exchanges. So from Coptic Christian Egyptian architecture influencing Fatimid architecture, which is a Muslim type of architecture, and then back and forth. There is a conversation, because despite of the two different theologies, but they're both in Egypt, and so there is common ground that must be respected. And that can apply to different places. And of course, we can see this in Turkey with so many examples. But the other ulterior motive I had while writing this thesis was questioning the typology of the mosque itself. And one of the good ways of being able to revisit a certain typology is to test it against a context where it didn't belong, or it's newly introduced to. That can help you even create mosques or typologies or examples of a certain typology, even in its original place, in a fresh way. Because you go down to the abstract, you go down to the essence. The other influence that was happening was this book that was being written from 2005 to 2015, exactly the year that I was commissioned the mosque. And it's 10 years of condensation of 40 years of research before that by an Egyptian called Ahmad Mustafa. He's an artist and a scholar. And for the last 10 years when he was writing this, I was with him in his studio in London. He was my friend 5 years before, but then he also became my father-in-law. So that gave me a lot of proximity. And he also gave me some of the research that he needed in this book, especially with the Arabic sources that I had to verify. That's him, this gentleman. And then next to him, this man is an Azhari scholar, so a scholar from Al-Azhar al-Sharif in Egypt. He's now the Minister of Religious Endowment, but back then he's 2 years senior to me. He was just my friend then. Now he's my friend, but a minister as well. And he is the patron of the mosque. So that the mosque is the land of his grandfather, and he's the one who asked me to come and design it. And this picture just shows that as architects, we need to have strong relationships with leaders of thought of all walks of life. And this is something that ferments for years. It's not like I will shut my senses and mind to anything but my very narrow specialization. I will not listen to doctors or priests or musicians. And then tomorrow they ask me to do an opera and I know nothing about music, and that doesn't work like that. Of course, if I've exposed myself for years, then my understanding will be fermenting. There is no limit to knowledge and understanding, but of course when you take your time with it, not under the pressure of a deadline or anything, it helps. And I think it paid well here. One of the things that he has done, Ahmed Mustafa, the artist, is this work of art called the Cube of Cubes. And it's exploring an understanding of a certain verse in the Quran where it's the names of God. So God is infinite. How could his names be finite? And there's a prophetic tradition where it speaks about the 99 names of God. Well, he's explaining that the 99 has a quantitative quality, but has a qualitative quality, which is infinity. This can take so long. And this was actually shown in the Vatican in a big exhibition in 1997. And it started so many conversations then. So that's him. So that work of art also, when I saw it, had a huge influence on my approach to the mosques, because we're talking about the sources here. So you can see, for instance, if we look at the date of this page from my notebook, it's 2009. I was commissioned the mosque in 2015, but the Cube of Cubes, this is the first time I was ever introduced to it, and so it's in my head, it's brewing for 6 years until that moment. But then again, also there are the considerations, and I like to put these slides because I like to encourage all my fellow architects and designers to use their hand and brain work very well together. AI is not going to take us anywhere, believe me. Just pull the plug, it's going to go. And things develop in this manner, because also these sketches are trying to show us that all the philosophy, all the theory, all the thoughts are important, but how we apply them to a given moment in time and space and people and budget and material and all of that matters. Otherwise we can be just philosophers who write, which is not something bad, but we're not architects. We bring philosophy or ideas to space or represent them in space rather. So here the plot, and of course everything was raised, and then there are many challenges. So that's the road, that's the cemetery. I jumped now to the design, but I just wanted to say that, for instance, the practical challenges, the narrow road limits constructability. I was lucky enough to be practicing design and building. Everything I designed before this mosque, I built, sometimes with my own hands. And so the awareness of constructability and its limitations was a big source here, because understanding how we cannot bring in heavy machinery and so on here, and the fact that we need to think of how things could be manual or manual labor or labor intense is a big influence. In order to be like the place we're in here is a place of worship, and imagine if we can hear the traffic outside, imagine if we can be attacked by really terrible smells of cattle and their droppings and so on. If our senses are being engaged, over-engaged, then we cannot be calm, we cannot be psychologically calm, and we cannot start our spiritual journey, which is the point of going to a place of worship. But at the same time, we need natural ventilation, we need natural lighting. That means openings and windows, but the same openings that are going to bring natural light and ventilation is going to allow the noises, the dust, the smells, and all of that. So how to do that? The solution here is in the roof, as I show it, or what we call in architecture the fifth facade, or what we can allude to is the solution is with heaven, you know, up there. So so symbolically but also functionally, thick walls, bent entrance, and all the openings are on the top where there's no noise, where there's no dust, where there are no smells, and where I can control the orientation, the proper orientation for wind and light. But I left one opening on this side overlooking the cemetery, okay, so that when we enter through the main entrance here and turn around, the Qibla is in this direction, the first thing that receives us is that window on the valley of death, so to speak, cemetery, the cemetery, to remind us where we're going, because every imam in the mosque says to make you go into a complete state of concentration. Say, pray as if you're doing your last prayer. If this is your last prayer before you meet God, how is it going to be? And I'm not going to write that on a sticker. I'm an architect. I need to do it spatially. So that's the only window we have in the whole mosque. So this is the layout. And just for the sake of the next slides, this is what I call the entrance dome. This is the central dome, and each one of these dark triangles are called pendentive domes. So we have the roof here was created of 108 little squares. Every square is divided into two triangles. One is made of glass to allow the light in, and one is high and opaque, which is made of a pendentive dome, because this follows the solar path. The sun comes out from the east, goes to the south for high noon, and then sets at the west. So this is like, if the sun is going this way, we have a big cover over the glass to allow the gentle light. And this is what I meant by going up to heaven. But another problem also, if we claim that religion is something that helps people with their lives, then we cannot reduce religion to just acts of ritualistic worship. Ritualistic worship is important, but also religion needs to answer our daily needs. So sustainability, the environment today, the biggest challenges, our planet is in danger, and one of the elements that are very neglected in mosque design today is the fact that if we turn them only into places of ritualistic worship, then 5 prayers a day, each one takes half an hour, then that's what, 2.5 hours out of 24 hours, all of these resources wasted. And to take the historical context, the first mosque that was built by the Prophet was not used only for ritualistic prayers. It was a community center. It served everyone. Muslims and non-Muslims were allowed in that mosque. So here, for instance, in the lower ground floor, I created a multi-purpose hall to respond to this, and we'll see through the drawings how we did this. And there's an entrance for men from here, an entrance from women here. So the mosque is on 3 levels. We have the lower ground floor, we have the ground floor, and then we have the gallery or the mezzanine. So this is the ground floor, and it could be entered from the main here or from the back here. And then the staircase has a door here that takes us to the lower ground floor that I just shown, or can take us up to the gallery here, which is exclusive for women. Women can be on all 3 levels. So this is it, this is the section, because then I'm saying that peak and off-peak, we have Friday prayers where the mosque needs to entertain the biggest number of worshippers, but on other days it doesn't need the same number of people. And so how can we do this lower ground floor in a way that it could be used for other functions? So for excessive number of prayers and then for celebrations, it's not, here is only prayer, but here it could be prayer, celebration, tuition, medical attention, and so on, and that needs to reflect on the plans. So by this statement, by this solution, then the mosque is used 24/7. And of course that needs to be responded to through working on the entrances, on the lighting controls and all of that. So the men come from this staircase and they enter here, the women come from here. I wasn't sure who's going to use the space more than the other, so we had movable partitions. So this is a 50-50 solution, but let's say it's less men and more women, the partitions can move here 25 to 75 and so on. The reality says that it's occupied 100% by women now. And then, another scenario where this could be for receiving guests, like the mosque has been a sensation and people come to visit it. It's in Lonely Planet, and people come, and when they receive the guests, they want to feed them. There are no restaurants, it's a small village, and this is where women from the neighboring houses can offer them food in this. It becomes a food hall, or a dining hall, sorry. Here it could be partitioned in different ways for medical care or so on. Now I'm going to show you the actual drawings of the mosque, because it's important to point out that the minaret, or the midana, was supposed to have a final top, which is again the cube of cubes, but for budgetary reasons we didn't do it. So this is the main facade on the road. It's a southern facade. This is the main entrance, and then this is the back entrance. And the reason why it's big and many people think that this is the main entrance is that it opens on the cul-de-sac that you've seen at the beginning, because when they have celebrations, let's say they have a wedding, the actual rituals are done in the mosque, but then people come out to celebrate outside. So it needs, when it's flung open, it needs to feel as an extension. Of course, the solar studies and all of that. I don't want to be too technical, but also this shows how the wind comes in and the hot air comes out, and how we collect water when it happens. So instead of having it as a threat to our roof, like what happened before, how to collect the rainwater and store it without really being excessive with a little village and asking them to go through a very expensive filtration unit. No, just store the water. We'll use it for things that don't need filtration, like watering plants or cleaning the floor. And it's a rare thing anyhow. But also, there are three things. I started with saying what is tradition and how can it take us to the future. And in my understanding so far, and it's very important to say so far, I see our understanding of, or my understanding of tradition to be three things. Number one is conscious imitation. And by conscious imitation, I'm opposing blind imitation, where the motivation becomes emotional, like we're just going to do like the old people did, like the ancient people, without understanding whether that imitation works or not for today. But conscious imitation is an unashamed imitation of something that was in the past that's still valid today, if it's the most valid solution. My example of that is the entrance dome. So if we look here, this is the Andalusian dome of the Grand Cordoba Mosque Cathedral now, and it's made of intersecting arches. But of course, it was in the Umayyad period, it had a lot of Byzantine influence, which is perfectly fine for its time. I'm in Egypt, I'm not in Andalusia, I don't have Byzantine influence. But the solution itself and the way it allows light in was very much needed for my entrance dome, because when I'm on the street in Upper Egypt, there's a lot of sun, there's a lot of glare. And if I enter under a roof right away, my eyes might hurt. So I need something that would allow light gradually. It's also very cheap and it's very fast. And it serves a meaning because it's the dome over the entrance. And I'm trying to say that entering to the more innovative elements comes through the understanding of a past element. So I imitated it, no problem, with brick. This is the plan of the Grand Cordoba Mosque. Of course, I didn't do the, and this is also another application by another architect who passed away, Egyptian architect, Abd al-Halim Ibrahim, in the entrance of the American University in Cairo. And it's a conversation that happened between us that made me think of this as an entrance dome. One man built this in less than a week, 5 days, 4 or 5 days. I was saying 3 stances, so conscious imitation, and it's represented in the entrance dome, and then the other position is shown in these pendentive domes, and the third one here. But I'm just making this, or like preempting, but here we're talking about the entrance dome. So you can see it's cheap, efficient, and fast. And this is how it is when it ended. So it gives us this. And here again we see the 3 elements I'm talking about, but from the interior, conscious imitation, and then this is the second stance, and this is the third stance. Again, conscious imitation is in woodwork. So this is a place where it's a desert atmosphere. The variation in temperature between day and night and between winter and summer can affect any woodwork. And it's a big threat, especially if you want to have big doors. But I was looking at the mosques and the churches in Egypt that stand there for hundreds of years with wooden doors that have not bent or anything. And what is the answer? It's a traditional Egyptian joinery called al-Jam'iyya al-Kamla, this is a detail of, and that's what makes the doors of Sultan Hassan or the Hanging Church stand for centuries without being affected in the same weather. So why go and do something modern when this is a very, very effective solution? In addition, of course, to its aesthetic value and all the ascribed Platonic ideas about geometry and the universe and all of that. Many people have this iterates many different meanings in the heads of people, and it's made by 2 people, like in a workshop in Egypt. You can see here the thing, the tradition. You can see how big the door is, and it can do bigger doors still. And this is it in situ. The second stance is reimagining past solutions and elements in an unprecedented way. And my example of this is the roof or the pendentive domes. So pendentive domes, historically, this and here, okay? When you go from a square plan to a circular plan, this is better than here, actually, we have it. You need to turn the square into an octagon at least, and we do that through pendentive domes. So pendentive domes were never independent architectural elements in the history of architecture. They were transitional structural elements solving the geometry between the square and the circle. Here, they were imagined as independent elements that cover the roof and work as wind catchers and skylights. Again, 2 men on top of a concrete gridiron. We don't need heavy machinery or anything. With a few bricks, they can do this. And this serves, as I said, it follows the solar path. You have the glass triangle. The sun is always casting, this is protecting the glass from the sun because it's in its way, and then the glass here has an opening that allows the northern breeze, which is the cold breeze that we need in a hot country, in like Egypt. As you can see, just one man is working, the other man is just bringing the brick on top of this gridiron. Here it is. This is how it looks from below, and these are the windows. So glass openings, and then you have wooden frame, and this is operable, it opens to the inside. This is the scale of it, it was 1.8 by 1.8. This is yours truly, so you can imagine the size. And then the third stance is tradition as methodology, not final products. So it's a way of thinking, it's a universal equation where we apply non-universal variables that, as I said, come from time, space, budget, technology, and so on. And the example for that is the central dome, obviously based on the golden ratio. And this is one thing that I like about a lot of architecture, traditional architecture, because architecture is, as they say, frozen music. It cannot move. It sits, this building sits here, but the only way it can move or animate is through creating it in a way where it can capture the movement of other things that move, like the sun. So sun and shadow. And this way the building is standing, but it's moving at the same time. And these are very light blocks that also helped us use less concrete, less steel, and they protrude on the inside and on the outside according to the golden angle. And of course there was no precedent of such dome before, because if you have something that geometrical or protrusions, you build a normal dome as in a flat surface dome, but then you do that through the cladding of the stone, for instance. So it's an understanding of how things work, creating a new tool, completely innovative tool, to be able to use the experience of the dome builder as he knows how to build it, to build something new. So if we look here, and this is a photo that I took from the minaret, and we can see the entrance dome while it was being built. We can see the pendentive domes, and then we can see the square and the corners that gives us the octagon and the beginning of the circle. And this is a tool that I had to come up with to bridge the gap, as I said, between my ambition and what the actual mason knows, and ensure that every block is in its position, in its X, Y, Z, because if anything is moved by even millimeters, the sun will expose, it will make that dome look very distorted. This is of course a computer generated model, and here these are my explorations of how to make the compass to build the thing, and here I generated it on the computer to make sure how we can place each one of these blocks in space. And the thing is, we cut these to certain dimension, to the proper dimensions that we have, and just place each corner on a notch on the steel here and on the inside, and that makes it perfect in its place. Because the idea, in order to come up with this golden angle in the dome, means that we need to maintain the same number of blocks in every circle, in every course. However, because the circles are smaller, if we keep the same number of blocks, then the blocks need to be smaller. So there was a cutting list. And here it is, all of this is computer generated, but very simple, like the whole thing was on a napkin, and then I was doing this just to make sure that the ratio of the mortar to the block is the proper one. And then here, this is a real photo. So if we go back, and here. Again, I had to drill the blocks to make sure that when they were placed, there was enough mortar keeping every block from slipping before we build the next one. So these red lines represent mortar going from the holes of the blocks. So two people cutting, and here's the cutting list and the drilling list. Everything is very simple. There's no robotics involved or anything. And then this was the test of the compass, the steel compass. It's 1/8 of the dome, and it rotates to give us everything else. I think these are the notches previously made. And then these are the steps. Number 1, square with a corner, and then 4 corners, circle, and merry goes round until we go to the final. I think this is a video. No. So CG, computer graphics, and real photo. Because we were testing how the sun is going to enter and animate this inner surface. Real photos now. Same thing applies to the ladies' prayer room walls, but I'm going to skip through that because I don't know how much time do we have, or shall I carry on? Sorry? Okay. So again, well, I mean, this was meant because there was a lot of opposition for the women going into the mosque because of issues of privacy, so I had to create this because it takes the stairs downwards and upwards, but while protecting their privacy, I wanted them to also have air and light come through. And then the minaret, because I'm always asked about it, which comes from, again, this is the big influence of the book of attending the book of the Cosmic Script, where it's an explanation of the theory of proportion script, which was established by Ibn Muqla, an Abbasid wazir in Baghdad in the 9th century, and he created the proportion script. And Ahmad Mustafa, the artist I was speaking about, is the scholar who deciphered what this theory means. And he's speaking about the dot, which is the base of every letter. But from the dot we have the alif, the Adam of all the letters. Is described by the Andalusian scholar. The alif, the letter alif, is described as the Adam of all the letter beings. As in the same way we are like Adam, every human being, every letter in Arabic out of the 28 letters is a manipulated alif. And it's basically constructed based on the area of a square in its box of space. And the blue here shows us that the orange, this area, could have different shapes, but it's the same area. So the blue is the same area of the orange. How did this create and then the height of the alif is 7 dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So from the dot in its box of space, we get the alif, which is the dark blue, okay, which is not perpendicular, but it's upright. That's another important concept. And from that, applying both in space, I got my minaret with a twist of 45 degrees. And this is it in reality. So this very modern looking or contemporary looking volume is actually based in an understanding of something that was done in the 9th century. It didn't look like it, but it understands it and it takes it forward. The cube of cubes, as I described it, which has the 99 divine names, which are also the base of the theory of ethics in Islam, which is very proper to make it as an orientation, because if you go to do your ritualistic prayer but come out and misbehave, then you have not prayed. So it's a good reminder while you're standing and seeing the 99 names, the generous, the forgiving, the gracious, and all of these names. Of course, then in order for it to act as a mihrab, it had to be flipped, which made it then a structural problem that was solved here. I'm not going to go through many technical details, but basically I was solving the problem of having 1 ton flying in the air 1.5 meters. Because this is usually how it is, it's sitting with gravity, but in order to make it a mihrab, we had to flip it. So this steel structure, and with alabaster, which is translucent, and you can see here, and then I'm fixing it. And this is it with light and without light. And then this is the project after it was completed. You can see the mosque in the fabric. Again, this is the main road, this is the cemetery, and this is the cul-de-sac. And of course, this is, you can see how it's different in orientation because it's going towards Mecca. You can see the windows, the pendentive domes, the central dome, the entrance dome. Regretfully, we don't have the top, but maybe one day. You can still see the tree. A lot of people wanted to cut the tree to help me build, but I was like, the tree is more ancient than the mosque. So, and I think it serves as a very good welcoming point. There's an 8-minute video at the end of this that we can play if you like, or we can go to the questions directly. This is the effect of the pendentive domes on the interior. This is the evolution. You remember the bathrooms that we had on top, we brought below, and we got it out of the axes of the Qibla. So we learned from what was before us, we avoided the same mistakes. The 3 stances I'm talking about, the entrance dome, conscious imitation, reimagining past elements in the pendentive domes, and tradition as methodology rather than final products. This was on the 21st of June, so the highest sun at noon. In use, of course, because we're always criticized as architects for showing our buildings without people. It's for people, so it's the most important thing.